everybody, and you are listening to 88.1 FM WVYC. You just heard Talking Straight from the Rolling Blackout CF. And thank you for joining me on this show on Friday, September 7th, 2018. So, my name is Keelan Tollinger. With me for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in and polishing off your second week on campus with me. So there's a lot to talk about. So besides the heat, it hasn't really felt like a summer has passed, if that makes sense. We only just had a single hurricane come ashore on the mainland United States, and thankfully it wasn't a major one, but when you take in the historic rainfall amounts we got throughout the region of Pennsylvania, the weather has been sort of strange. Hopefully it stays decent for the first Friday of the school year. That's a pain to say, but once you're done listening to my show, go check it out, please. Because as far as what we'll cover today between the music, there was an active shooter drill carried out on campus that has some reaction to that. There is an interesting lecture that I heard over the summer about shortwave radio, and I hope to share that with you and the interesting personality of the individual who shared it with me. I'll go over President Trump's summer and the series of gaffes he's had within his inner circle and outside of it, plus an event this week that got people burning their shoes. All that once we get into some music. So, from their new album, Bark Your Head Off Dog, here is Hop Along with their song How Simple, here on WVYC. Be right back. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of York College. You just heard How Simple from the band Hop Along, and let's get into the first topic of the afternoon. So, I remember plenty of times throughout my earlier schooling about emergency preparedness. In a Catholic school I went to in kindergarten and first grade, there was a drill where we dealt with suspicious people in the hallways. If Mr. Redtree was announced over the PA system and he was in the lower school, the door gets locked and everyone huddles against the wall out of sight in the dark until Mr. Greentree enters the lower school. Of course, you throw in fire drills throughout elementary school, the tornado drills from time to time until they stopped those, and then my area actually had one. I don't remember any active shooter preparedness drills in my time during high school, but lockdowns and locker searches were often occurrences, especially when in one year someone kept writing threats on bathroom stalls and they'd evacuate the school for the rest of the day. But to me, it feels like I finished school at the time before the real paranoia about attacks has settled in throughout the country. But with the reality that all kinds of public spaces, office buildings, venues, are all places where you have to stay vigilant, preparedness is something you can never grow out of. York College tried out a special active shooter training yesterday at 3:30. The premise was that if your class or event was going on, you still need to drop what you're doing and either shelter in place if a campus safety officer comes through the building and declares there's someone inside, or everyone else needs to be evacuated elsewhere. There's a positive to this college wanting to stay ahead of things and test their procedures, but they also had to deal with likely most of the college not understanding what was going on or not taking it seriously, considering the fact that we were reminded just about every day of the week through our email. Now, this is a step up from the things the college has done in the past to prepare for emergencies. In my past 3 years here, there's often a test of their alert systems about once a semester or so. You'd basically get an email, phone call, and text simultaneously, just a test. But in this case, it was a pretty real situation. A phone call and email to announce it began, and then it was time to wait for what was going to happen. I kind of have an odd story about my experience. I work in the college's writing center, doing my shift in the middle of this test. I just got done looking through a student's essay, and we finished up just a few minutes before this happened. This whole room was empty apart from me, but I got the call from this robotic female voice saying, "It's only a test, comply with the campus safety officer's directions." Well, they chose the Humanities Building as one of the places where we'd have to shelter in place, because as I'm listening to this call, here comes a guy in uniform walking down the back hall shouting, "There's a shooter in the building, take shelter now, etc., etc." He walked past the entrance of my room, reading his script, heading to another classroom, so I did what I thought was right, sort of against my will, because I thought it'd be helpful if the writing center was still open for anyone that wanted to come by, but I sat in the dark, except for my computer screen still trying to do some work. Guess I never check if the door locks from the outside if I close it, because 3 minutes later, the same officer sticks his head in through the door frame and says I should have blocked the door or something, so I guess I should be dead. Anyway, there wasn't much more to it than that, at least in my corner of the school. Though I heard from other people that, for instance, the student union building with the dining hall was told it had to evacuate immediately. So people had to leave their plates behind and gather outside. For others, since they're at their dorms, it was kind of like nothing really had happened. And I'm sure for some professors they're a little disappointed they have to use up 15 minutes of lecture time, but it was all traded in for a little more understanding of the college's emergency procedures. I still appreciate they took the time to test this sort of situation. I've got a couple questions though, like why I never received an emergency text alongside my call and email. I have a feeling I have to go online and register something again, even though my phone number hasn't really changed. They also use this sort of emergency alert for incidents going on outside the college. I know before in my past shows I've talked about the timely warning notifications if a crime happened here on campus or on nearby streets. So far, nothing major this semester, except for a random message to tell us on Labor Day to keep off the 200 block of Jackson Street, since there was a fire. I think it was only a minor electrical one and wasn't that big of a disaster, thankfully. My only gripe was that it was sort of incomplete. The call had the text-to-speech voice just start leaving the voicemail in the middle of the message, and that can't really fly when the information is missed halfway. I hope that elsewhere this recent drill was taken semi-seriously though, but there's always going to be the unfortunate aspect to this sort of thing that it has to happen in the first place. And no matter how many officers you position either to respond to a real emergency or situation, or a simulation of one, there's going to be gaps, there's going to be vulnerabilities for terrible people to exploit. So until we live in a more secure world, and I'm always going to be advocating for more evaluations into people, surveillance of their internet searches, closer observation to the mental states of gun owners. The innocent people are just trying to live their lives. Protecting them is seeking out the dangerous individuals before they can trigger an emergency response. So let's go into another song at this hour. Coming up next on WVYC, it's Jackson Phillips, known more by his studio name of Daywave, with his song Deadbeat Girl. Back in a few. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of York College. So, moving right along to our next topic, I said I was going to be talking about what I learned about shortwave radio. But I need to give a huge shout out to the guy who taught me about it first, because he's as interesting as the topic itself. Now, YouTube's given a broadcast platform to a lot of interesting people over the years. Some make their whole channel around reviews, and there's all sorts of ways that can be taken. Every piece of technology getting released these days is being picked up by a YouTuber, orienting their content towards other tech-savvy people, or for mothers to find out if they really need a high-end blender that connects to Wi-Fi. Adults that can pass as kindergarten teachers the way they engage the audience are often the ones who can review toys for their young viewers, so kids can be informed consumers when their parents take them out next to a store. Trust me, toy reviews are a pretty big deal these days. Music album reviews are another big field on YouTube as well, so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that food is another reviewable item that certain people can make hundreds of videos of. It's become the wheelhouse of a specific YouTuber in particular on a channel named The Report of the Week. The guy's name is John. He's a young guy in his mid-20s from what it seems like, and the way he delivers his content is probably one of the most wholesome things on the internet. His thing is that he's always appearing in front of a camera in a suit and tie. White starched shirt, underneath, sleeves just long enough, thin head of hair combed and gelled. It's like a TV company is preparing him for these sorts of shows. But apparently it's just one guy with a passion for food. He's also literally so skinny, and that's a surprise because most of what he does is order from the newest item on a menu of a fast food restaurant. Because keep in mind, he can't be going into an Applebee's or an Olive Garden at a table for one talking to a camera in the other booth. He just orders a single item, sets up a recording device on the dashboard of his car, at his kitchen table or on his back patio, at his house, and spends about 10 minutes doing an unscripted review of how popular the item is. Then he normally shows the box that it comes in, what the inside of it looks like after the first cut of the knife, and of course, how he feels it tastes. People love the genuine nature of his reviews, that he doesn't go over the top with praise. He isn't sponsored by any restaurants to eat anything specific. All of his videos are just surprises for what he picks. They're raw footage and delivered with a no-nonsense attitude. The thing I find so fascinating about his videos is just the lengths he goes to obtain food that's limited edition out there. So McDonald's has these honey barbecue glazed chicken tenders on their menu now, and He opened his recent video about them saying that he drove to over a dozen McDonald's in his area. He lives in Central Florida, and just called and tracked down this chicken until it was about 3 in the morning, and he finally cut to the exhausting conclusion where he got them. And still, his attention to detail was so fine that he made sure to park his car in a spot where the golden arches and the roof of the restaurant were still visible outside of his driver's side window over his shoulder as he dug in. He's just only done this for a few years, but is a master of his craft. His voice is kind of like this steady, even-keeled tone all the time. He doesn't get overexcited when he enjoys something, and he doesn't sound super disappointed when he doesn't. Even when John is handing out this wicked dry humor, being as harsh as he can, just listen to this one line. He filmed himself in silence for a minute, trying out this butterfly shrimp from Popeyes, took a sip from his glass of water, daintily wiped his mouth, paused, looked at the camera, and just had this to say.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Maybe I have the weirdest sense of what makes me entertained in this world, but something about the flatness of his voice, just how much that contrasts with his distaste, it amuses me a lot. And if you don't get it, that's okay. The hundreds of thousands of people that watch his videos love the bits of emotion that John manages to get out. That line in particular was so popular, John sells t-shirts that you can order online with those words on it, and he's probably sold hundreds. You don't make a man that nice disappointed in your food, or else his fans will support him by buying his merchandise. It's just magic how uplifting his plain personality can be. He's just a noble, regular guy that knows how to entertain just being him. Now, finally, what associates him with shortwave radio anyway? Just in the past month, John started prefacing his reports of the week by saying he has a radio show. Kind of just like me, where he talks news and plays some music. I think his are actually several hours long, and he's been at it for many more years than me. He tried using his reviews to suggest, well, if you like his form of content, he has more over the airwaves. He started getting enough support that he shared a lecture he put together. It's just audio of him sitting at his desk on his back patio at 3 in the morning and talking for 2.5 hours about the state of shortwave radio. And I gave a listen to it one afternoon over the summer, and I very quickly understood he probably has a passion for this more than food reviews, and it shows. John was always curious about the broadcast industry, from what he says about his childhood. Long-distance walkie-talkies, the ones you can tune to different frequencies and pick up conversations from miles around. The police scanners you can go online and listen to in major cities like New York and San Francisco of their radio chatter. I think the thing that gripped his attention the most was the paranormal types of radio, the lone signals of strange ghostly sounds like Serbian broadcast stations that you picture buried in snow but sending out these odd numbered codes, indecipherable messages unless you're a spy. John bought his own shortwave radio set and learned how to use it himself, and then found online communities with other fanatics, and like in the modern day, who still turn on their sets and browse through all the different frequencies in their area and around the world. Now, the thing that quickly interested me is how widespread a shortwave radio signal can be. John explained that if you have a favorite FM broadcast station, for instance, and want to go for a ride in your car, let's say you start in Philadelphia, you can go a little ways down the turnpike before that signal starts to cut out and all you get is static. But with AM radio, the talk shows, you can get some better range with those frequencies, but go outside of the state, and eventually you'll be too far away to listen as well. Shortwave radio is so versatile that basically you can drive all the way out to his home in Central Florida and flip a switch, and as long as you know how to tune your set, you can find a station from any corner of the globe. A shortwave one, that is. As long as there is an antenna broadcasting somewhere, any location can be picked up if you know how to do it. So John started making lists of all the different channels he could find, identifying, doing research on, getting familiar with these broadcast stations, even if they were in a different country, different continent, different language. He apparently just categorized it all just like how he combed fast food places for the newest items. He got permission to send his own broadcasts out at a local station near him in Florida, VORW I think the call letters are, and he gets emails from hundreds of gracious people who enjoyed his content over the months. That's a success story as good as his YouTube career right there. Now, John and I would probably also acknowledge that shortwave radio technology is quite dated. Like, this is the stuff that news from World War II would normally be, like, broadcasted on. The downside is that as commercial radio in general loses ground in popularity to CDs, music streaming, and internet news, shortwave radio stations disappear much quicker from the sheer fact that the hobbyists who use and listen to them are simply passing away from old age. John is a young guy who just discovered his passion in the last 5 years for this stuff, and he is the biggest advocate by far for getting newcomers into the hobby for future generations to come. So, as he leaves his email address at the tail end of his shows, you can ask him about how to get your own shortwave radio set and get that tuned. He apparently also has his own miniature store through Amazon, where he lists a few trusted brands of his suggestions, and you can order them. But who still regularly uses shortwave radio these days? Like truckers who go cross-country can use these things to communicate for transportation or loneliness sometimes. People in underdeveloped countries who don't have access to television or the internet still at least have their radio sets with the BBC's or American National News, Russia's, Egypt's. In some cataclysmic event that the United States' power goes out, and the television media is suppressed and censored to oblivion where it can't even function, shortwave radio stations will still be elsewhere in the world. A whole network where an individual can understand what's going on around the globe, even in the bleakest of circumstances. John, as a Floridian, of course, has survived days where his region loses power after a hurricane rolls through, and the only form of entertainment sometimes when television or smart devices don't work is to simply put in the spare batteries in a shortwave radio set and just stick to it for a while. It's a simple picture. It may even be a boring outlook, depending on who you are, but that's just who he genuinely is in his YouTube reviews. He's just a typical guy with a typical hobby, and I love the quaintness of it. I want to take a little break from John's story in a sec and get through the PSA of the hour. So, getting back to my story about shortwave radio. So I read a story about years and years ago in elementary school where I remember the first mention of shortwave radio coming up. That was 51 Sycamore Lane, or A Spy in the Neighborhood. It's a novel for kids written by Marjorie Wyman Sharmat, published all the way back in 1973. But I remember reading it in like 5th grade for a book report, and basically just like, okay, the story is like this elderly woman moves into a house by a trio of 3 boys. They're all friends, and one's invited to this new neighbor's house in for lemonade or something, and he spots this setup taking a whole section of her living room, files everywhere. His conclusion, in the context of the Cold War, was that his new neighbor might be a spy. He and his 2 friends tried going to the city to find a lawyer, of all things, who they assume would get to the bottom of things. They just take it too far, as neighborhood kids do. Long story short, the woman explains she uses her shortwave radio to talk to people in different countries. Then by the end, they're all sitting around it, listening to headsets. It's just a neat book that after my sister read it for a book report in her elementary school years, that's probably donated to the Salvation Army at this point. But when it comes to the relevance of shortwave radio today, John admitted that a lot of it is running out these days. And like he said, much of the people who use them are dying out. Stations that have broadcasting news on like a national level are closing down one by one. So he mentioned places like Latvia and Singapore that have their signals here in the States that can't sustain themselves anymore. Now there was a portion where John went through his dial at like 4 in the morning and just proved that there's still programming to hear even at every hour of the day, though it's mostly pre-recorded. And it seemed to me to be a lot of religious or somewhat polarizing in approach. Like, for being under the radar in a medium like shortwave, there's some, I'd say, sketchier business stations staying alive through huge pools of money alone, the funds of dead pastors, political groups. These are just some of the things that occur in at least America's broadcast space. There certainly isn't much in the vein for kids these days that they'd enjoy. But perhaps the spare news organizations who try to project unbiased, objective media in the face of oppressive regimes or other limitations in terms of countries worldwide, that draw still exists. So while the people who daily throw on their shortwave radio sets dwindles, there's still a huge draw for hundreds of millions elsewhere in the world. I'm not sure if I'll be investing in one myself, at least not while still in college, but that's basically the extent of all I gathered listening to that impressive lecture. It's kind of amazing just how much that guy knows all from ad-libbing his lecture, but that's what being committed to your hobby can do. Definitely check out his YouTube channel at The Report of the Week and see what his video personality is all about though. So, we've gotten through the PSA in the middle of the hour. Time to move on to another song. Here is a track from a performer known as League. His song, sorry, I mixed that up. So, his band name is Foliage. His song is League. So, here is League, here on 88.1 FM WVYC. Be right back. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. You just heard Foliage with their song League. It's very important to get the artist name and the track title correctly because he's a pretty small performer. I don't even know where he lives. He doesn't even have a label, a record label, but I found his song, thought it was pretty neat, thought I'd play it. So, halfway through the hour, it's time to get political. Remember that everything that I'll say here is just my personal opinion, and I try to be as educated and not callous as possible as I share my thoughts. So, in the middle of sophomore year, it was decided that Donald Trump had won the presidential election. Against the prediction of all the polls and the loudest voices on social media, especially the ones heard around this campus that spoke he would never, ever make it this far. And yet, nearly 600 days into his term, here we are still. You know, a lot of the predictions about the mismanagement of his staff were pretty true. You could play bingo with the people who have been crossed out and kicked from the White House since day one. Things have been relatively stable so far, at least as his current staff is concerned, but the people who were at Trump's side previously, like Mr. Manafort and Mr. Cohen, sure, their guilty verdicts in court say a lot about what these men have done to have kept the campaign afloat, but their jobs are done. They're toast. I'll be honest that the one thing that I'm sort of tired of hearing about is all the multiple stories the news outlets are breaking, have broken over the summer. The people within his circle going down, the public disappointment building, and then the speculation that this event and then that event will be the thing that could get the impeachment hearings rolling. It hasn't really amounted to anything yet. And I'm still under the belief that unless there is real cemented evidence that Trump is an illegitimate fit for office, be it concrete proof that he colluded with the Russians, or that his work is really that disruptive to the country, he isn't going to go anywhere. He shouldn't, so that we as Americans don't have to admit that our president has collectively failed us. I'll try to clear up what I said. I feel like, for one thing, Trump's so adamant about there being no cooperation between him and the Russians is basically because he was oblivious the whole time about what they were doing, independently, to help him. At the very least, he turned a blind eye to it and tried to laugh along with the foreign support when he asked the people behind it, can you dig up Hillary's emails too? I believe that the social media campaigns these groups of agents or guided bloggers or whoever put together to confuse the American people, that happened, it's been over, and it's done with. But I'm still waiting for the proof that Trump knew that the false information they spread about Hillary and the Democrats was somewhat, in any part, his consent or his involvement. It just happened because Russia likely understood that the best way to destabilize this country was to get a non-politician into the highest seat of office. So yes, then the American people voted with their silent motivations and took a gamble on a man without much knowledge of how his position works, the intricacies of working between the branches of government. I don't think Trump has figured that out yet. But there's obviously something he misunderstood about how much power he has, and he tells us on Twitter that so many of the people surrounding him are doing bad jobs just because they disagree with him or aren't acting in his interests fast enough. I just like, it's more that they disagree with them, and just the bright side is that the progress he was going to make hasn't quite come to fruition. The border wall isn't built. Clinton is not locked up. Other parts of our government are resisting him. And where we see more of President Trump's handiwork is elsewhere, as expected in the business world, with the economy improving under Trump for the most part, the unemployment rate shrinking ever so gradually. Wall Street's steady rise is relatively positive. Maybe you'd still like to gauge his success on things outside of money, and that's fair. To revisit some of the conflicts within the Oval Office there's been, I think the kind that fascinates me the most is the struggle of controlling information. I still can't find the reason why Trump cares so much about his image and his public perception. The information, the feedback coming the other way needs to fit with his ideals, it seems. The New York Times wrote an article in July about a stir aboard Air Force One, in which a television in Melania Trump's separate room was tuned to CNN and not Fox News. The selected information he consumes and also spreads in return seems to always fit his narrative. In that same article, he's quoted in his speech at an annual convention for the veterans of foreign wars in saying, "Stick with us. Don't believe what you see from these people, the fake news. What you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening." Everything is basically viewed through the lens of a battle or a competition to him, and to feel comfortable about his progress, it seems he has to shut himself in and not acknowledge the other side. It's really an intriguing struggle in what permeates through the mass media, I suppose. And while we talk about what Trump's staff and his aides have to do to pacify him, something like making sure a TV channel stays set, recently it seems like they have to do much more than anticipated to keep the White House under at least the illusion that it's running smoothly. A new book has been making the rounds written by Bob Woodward, one of the Washington Post reporters who broke the Watergate scandal in the 70s, titled Fear, Trump and the White House. No real plans to read it for me since I've got enough college textbooks to get through on a daily basis. But from many, many interviews, Woodward understands that there is a tight inner circle trying to keep Trump basically on a leash. They've had to do so much in terms to slow down his impulses, try to maintain constitutional norms, keep the military in line. It almost equates to a second president acting as a group. And Trump has had plenty to say about how untrue this book is, whether you should, and whether you believe his words or not, it's up to you. Regardless, I don't think even these investigative reports, ones printed for bookstores, is going to generate enough to set the grounds for impeachment. There just hasn't been solid, clear, condemning missteps, and the glue is still holding as well. As there's often a light at the end of the tunnel, there's a couple things that we should have faith in. One, that Trump's presidency will be over with in due time. We're getting through to the midway point in his minimum of 4 years, sooner or later, and though it's been a whirlwind of a time, like we haven't been able to take our eyes off the drama ever since it started, I'm feeling confident at least that it'll pass one way or another. Secondly, all of the answers will be sorted out with the passage of time as well. What interests me the most is when Trump's presidency ends, and all the people who worked with him, under him, though tight-lipped about their service at first, there is the chance that there's going to be many, many stories of what really went on, and it'll probably serve as history lessons so that no span in America's future will be as dysfunctional as it is now. John McCain's advice to the country after his passing, I think, will come true, that as a nation we'll slowly recognize our missteps and fix ourselves. I have faith in his words as a long-time trusted government official who had years to understand America's trajectory through its ups and downs. That is basically all I have to say on my Trump checkup for now. Perhaps there'll be segments like this in the future as the weeks go on, and I can report on them as they come up. I think we've lingered here long enough though, so how about that weather we're having? This next song that we're going to get into is for the person with the stellar taste in music who was playing this song as I was picking up my package from Amazon on Wednesday. This band would make a slow job in Northside Commons' mail center so much livelier. Anyway, it's Turnover with the track Humming. You're listening to 88.1 FM WVYC, and I'll be back in a moment. Turnover with Humming here on 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. One last topic to get into. So we've covered one individual who can't stay out of the news for very long, so let's shift gears to another one. Ex-football quarterback Colin Kaepernick returned to headlines earlier this week after signing an advertisement deal with Nike Apparel, sportswear extraordinaires for 30 years, in a campaign meant to highlight athletes who stand for something. It was announced on Twitter on Monday, and the television ad played during the NFL season opener on Thursday night. Kaepernick voices over a montage of incredible athletes, young ones who have limbs missing or have overcome diseases doing their thing, showing off their passion for sports. He tells the stories of LeBron James and Serena Williams briefly before he finishes with, "Don't ask if your dreams are crazy, ask if they're crazy enough." How did he get to this point where he can be a commercial spokesperson? So to sum up Colin's career, he joined the 49ers as a second-round draft pick in 2011. After their starting quarterback Alex Smith went down in a game, the new guy stepped up and dazzled with his balance of throwing and running ability. He seemed like a pretty promising guy. The peak of his career was when he started San Francisco's last Super Bowl game in the February of 2013, the year when the lights went out around the dome, but couldn't quite seal up a victory. From there, they lost in the NFC Championship game the next year under Kaepernick, but he still signed a $126 million deal over the course of 6 years. He was basically their lock. A Beats headphones endorsement in hand, and he was becoming the face of a young up-and-coming athlete. However, after finishing 8-8 in 2014, the 49ers missed the playoffs for the first time in 4 years. Coach Jim Harbaugh left to manage Michigan University football, so 2015 was the year that Colin really struggled under replacement coach Jim Tomsula. Halfway through that season, he was benched and replaced by a quarterback named Blaine Gabbert, a guy who has never had quite a good quarterback position in forever. The two of them were kind of locked and they struggled to outdo each other in terms of mediocrity. Colin decided that he'd be interested in being traded to another team, and he and the 49ers trimmed down their contract to 2 years instead. In the 2016 preseason was when Kaepernick's real story starts, when he was spotted sitting on a bench during the national anthem. Afterwards, he explained that he was not going to stand up for a country that oppresses black people and other persons of color. His issue was mostly with police brutality, an understandably hot-button topic at the time in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement. After he sat once, he started to kneel instead in protest for the remaining preseason game, and then for each time he was on the sidelines of that season, even though he was the backup quarterback. Now, with the split opinion on his protesting, the NFL's rankings tanked, the ratings tanked, I should say. Colin became the most unpopular player in the league, yet simultaneously the one with the highest jersey sales. Once that tumultuous season ended, during the spring of 2017, in March, Kaepernick decided he wasn't going to be battling for the job anymore and opted out of his contract. He became a free agent to see if other teams would want to use him, and as of today, it feels like being unemployed for the 17-18 season, he's still being unselected by all 32 teams. His career is basically on hold. Colin filed a grievance against the NFL, and while I think Kaepernick has good reason to do that, I don't really believe the teams intentionally conspired against him, at least as a unit. I feel each team individually understood that the controversy, the public relations trouble, would be a lot for an organization to deal with. It's sad they have to do something like that and worry about their image, but take into account his impact as a player as well. The 2016 season for the 49ers was abysmal. They went 2-14, even though Kaepernick played in 12 of those games. Their home stadium was virtually empty. Granted, with 16 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, you can maybe make the argument he could still be a decent player, but that was like back then or never in terms of continuing his career. The more time he spends off the field, obviously the less believable you are as a player worth signing. I can't envision him as a player again, even though I believe he didn't, just like as a 49ers fan, it feels like Kaepernick distracted himself and his team. I guess he didn't really mean to. But he has doubled down on being an activist and started donating his funds to organizations, along with the silent protests. Instead of recognition for awards, elevated his status to an icon. He stuck with his stance even as other players took a fair amount of time to speak up with him. He had to endure death threats and, of course, come to terms with the fact that organizations are avoiding him. I think what's most interesting is how his protesting method changed. He took a knee instead of sitting after the first week because he met with former player and veteran Nate Boyer. Now, Kaepernick didn't want to insult the military. That's why he took a knee. It's recognition of suffering is what it comes down to. When, for instance, another football player is injured on the field and is dealing with a rough injury, it's common for teammates to kneel as they're stretchered off. It's a peaceful sign of empathy for when times are difficult. Though here's this thing with the meaning of Kaepernick's protest. The sad part of it is that as African Americans, from prominent ones to everyday citizens, speak out about the treatment of their race. On the other side of the fence, there are those who criticize others who wish for equality and call it unpatriotic. I do understand the backlash that our American flag is a symbol fought tirelessly for, to be upheld and still standing. But this whole thing has slowly morphed and become less about police brutality as Colin said it should be, and more about what type of individual should be speaking out. Someone has to do it. But yet some find it objectionable that athletes are the faces carrying the message, a message. Are they supposed to just be staying silent and crashing into each other for our entertainment? And so we arrive to this week, where Kaepernick still has no official work in football, but still a public figure as a Nike sponsor. When this campaign was announced, the backlash was just as swift as when the kneeling started. Hashtags on Twitter were born: boycott Nike, and the really interesting one, a play on the slogan, just burn it. And there was a picture of a guy who mangled his white socks with a pocket knife or a pair of scissors and cut away the swoosh logo on them. One video of another young man tossing his pairs of Nike shoes into an incinerator. Always, you have to keep in mind that these forms of protest are extreme cases. They're from people not as popular as Kaepernick, so in order to generate buzz, they have to state their case as loudly as possible. Oftentimes, those measures are amplified just from how absurd they are. We'll have to see if it works and the negative impact on sales they're all prophesizing is true, or we just shake our heads at all the money these protesters are wasting. Or of their time swearing they'll never buy another Nike product again. But you know what they say, any publicity is good publicity. And the conversations that I think this sort of campaign will drum up using Kaepernick's image could, in fact I'll bank on it, it'll turn out positive. Because apart from all the destructive reactions of people ruining their clothes, the people who are thinking about this situation rationally, who aren't being influenced by social media, they're the ones that are out there silently. It's like the pre-election polls that forecasted Trump and Hillary. Even though they're not causing a stir on social media, they'll vote with their wallets, basically. And I'm pretty interested in seeing how this all turns out. But I'm still pessimistic in Colin's playing career, the more I see him turning his efforts towards marketing instead of trying to get back out onto the field. But of course, that's his decision, and like it or not, he's probably getting a comfortable sum of money being a Nike spokesperson. So, no song to close the hour, unfortunately. That will wrap it up for me in the studio for this week. I wanted to finish it off by saying that the station here at WVYC had a pretty good turnout for their first general staff meeting of the year. There were upwards of 80 names that signed on into the involvement fair, where all the freshmen come around to the different organizations and ask to be emailed for when the clubs are first going to meet and add the new members. At the meeting on Wednesday, there had to be 30 to 40 people or so, about, many of who I assume are freshmen, and it's neat to see a lot of interest this early. New blood, new shows, it's going to be so important to the station in the future. Anyway, time for me to head out, so thank you for joining me this afternoon. Have a great weekend and recharge for the next week of the semester. Finishing off the hour, here is The National with their song The System Only Dreams in Total Darkness. Have a good weekend, everybody. Hope to catch you next time.
Ooh.